So for the benefit of those watching who weren't hearing what I was saying because my mic was off, I'm talking about concepts. And saying that concepts can be very useful, but not to mistake them as for truth. They're not truth. Anything anyone has ever said or written is always a concept, but it's an accurate concept, or it's a helpful concept, pointing at what needs to be seen. So, before going into all the concepts, if we were to sit quietly just for a few minutes, the relevance of doing that is for me to be able to highlight that all of the words are here simply to bring about a resting in quietude. The concepts can undo, can contrast, they'll bring into contrast beliefs that are in the system that may not be seen to be beliefs because some of these beliefs are so deeply ingrained that they're just assumed to be truth. That's what a belief is. A belief is a concept that is absolutely believed, and therefore it's not seen as a belief. An example of this is the deepest belief is I am the body, as a separate independent entity. And if you asked someone if they have the belief that they're the body as a separate independent entity, they might think you're a little crazy. And that belief has been put in place because the experience in each moment suggests that this is the case. And so the experience reaffirms this belief moment after moment after moment for our whole life. So then a spiritual concept comes along and says, you are not the body, you are consciousness. You are the formless awareness in which everything arises. It's a concept. It may or may not be accurate. And in this case, one of the benefits of having that concept introduced is for you to then realize, wow, there's a concept that says I am formless awareness. I am consciousness. Which might then make us realize that actually I don't believe that at the moment. I don't experience that. But I'm open to the fact that, well, I'm clear that it's a concept that may be accurate. So, what do I currently experience myself as? Or what belief do I have about who I am? And that concept that you are formless awareness or consciousness may highlight that actually at the moment I believe that I am the body. And that introducing a contrast to the ingrained beliefs can highlight the fact that these beliefs are there. And there are some beliefs that are deeply ingrained, that are particularly problematic to the human experience. They're not problematic from the human experience when it's assessed from the ultimate perspective. From the ultimate perspective, whatever is happening, intense suffering, it's part of the picture, totally valid. But from the human perspective, what is most problematic from the human perspective about the human experience is suffering, which is an uncomfortableness with oneself, an uncomfortableness with the other, an uncomfortableness with life. So from the human perspective, this uncomfortableness with oneself is something that we can't stand. It's actually what drives the seeking. It's this uncomfortableness with oneself which is known deep down on an intuitive level to not be our true nature. And so we can't rest comfortably when that's there, and it drives this seeking for something real, something true. So anyway, I'm going a little off topic. Concepts. There's going to be hundreds of concepts that are presented in this teaching. And for us to understand that they are concepts, relate to them as such, and most importantly, see what they are pointing at for ourselves in our own experience. That means assessing our daily life experience for ourselves. And because spiritual seeking can sometimes be quite esoteric in nature, and a lot of the teachings and concepts are pointing to those aspects that we don't have direct contact with, it's very easy for certain concepts to become beliefs. For example, I am formless awareness. Someone can hear that and read it over and over again, and by the end of a month of reading this, they're going around saying, hey, I'm not the body. I'm formless awareness. I am consciousness. And the way that beliefs tend to get put in place is we don't realize, the person doesn't realize that maybe they've actually just become deluded in a different way. Deluded with the belief that I am consciousness. So the purpose of the concept is not for it to be believed, but for what it's pointing at to be seen, so that it's known. This seeing, this knowing is something experiential sometimes, or it's just about a clear observation of what is being pointed at. And so in these concepts, rather than talking about esoteric things, we're talking about practical daily living, which means the concept can be observed for yourself in practical daily living. So we start with the question, what are we really looking for in life? So if we were sitting like we are, I would expect that someone would answer the question, maybe we're looking for enlightenment. But that answer is not really very practical. What is that? How can we observe it? How can we understand it? So let's answer the question in much more practical terms, practical daily living terms. Because we might find ourselves seeking and being on a spiritual search, going to different teachings, doing different practices, without having a clear answer to the question that is something that we understand, an answer that we actually understand. And when we look at what is driving the seeking, we can see that what is driving the seeking is this uncomfortableness or unhappiness. And we can, for ourselves, at a particular point during the day, feel a certain feeling and say, in this moment, I know I am uncomfortable or I am unhappy. So we can know our unhappiness for ourselves. We can come to explore it, investigate it, know what it is. Which means that unhappiness now is no longer just a concept. It's something we understand, we can feel. And another concept will be put forward and say that our unhappiness is an uncomfortableness with oneself that we can call suffering. And it arises in the form of guilt, blame, pride, worry and anxiety, expectation and attachment to outcomes. So those 5 headings basically covers all forms of human suffering. Human suffering that in each moment or various moments throughout the day we can actually feel and say, in this moment I know I'm not happy. So the suggestion would be, okay, so now what is that uncomfortable feeling? And as we look at it in more and more detail, we'll find that it fits into one of these categories: guilt, blame, pride, worry and anxiety, attachment to outcome and expectation. And in practical terms, what are we looking for? We're looking for happiness. Happiness for the human being right now in this life. We might kid ourselves and say, actually, I'm not looking for happiness. I'm looking for something much, much, more transcendental than that. Happiness would be a very, selfish objective to look for. I'm looking for oneness with God, or I'm looking to know myself. I'm looking for enlightenment. If we do that, we might find ourselves in a conceptual realm where we get quite lost. The question we might ask is, why are you looking for union with God? Why are you looking for enlightenment? Just like someone might say, if I ask, what are your objectives in life? And they might say, well, I'm building a very successful business. That's my objective in life. I say, well, why do you want to build a successful business? Well, because it will give me financial independence, financial freedom. So in that case, your objective really is financial freedom, financial independence. Yet you've answered it by saying your objective is to build a successful business. And then we look further. So why do you want financial independence, financial freedom? Oh, well, because that will make me happy, or that will make life easy. So really, you're looking for a happy life or an easy life. And you've come to the conclusion that that is going to be delivered through financial independence, for example. So if someone is seeking enlightenment, the question is, why are you seeking enlightenment? And if we come to see that the drive for enlightenment is actually this uncomfortableness, this unhappiness in our life. And so someone is seeking enlightenment. Why? Because we believe that when that's delivered, there won't be this uncomfortableness or this unhappiness. So really, in practical terms, if we ask the question, what are we really looking for in life? The answer is, I'm looking for happiness for Roger in this life. And I think I will get it through a whole different range of solutions. And what is the happiness that we're looking for? It's simply the absence of unhappiness, the absence of suffering. If we look at our behavior and society's behavior throughout time, we'll find that the formula that people have for happiness, the ingrained belief, is that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. My happiness is to be found in circumstance. And outcomes and circumstance means either pleasure or pain. So the deeply ingrained belief, whether it's recognized or not, is that my happiness is to be found in outcomes, in pleasure or pain. Really, happiness in pleasure and the absence of pain. And people can live an entire lifetime seeking happiness in pleasure and ultimately die frustrated. If we're lucky, we'll spend a significant amount of time, or an amount of time seeking happiness through pleasure. We'll get the pleasures that we're seeking from time to time. And if we get the pleasures that we're seeking from time to time, we'll be able to register, yes, that's pleasurable, but the pleasure lasts for a very limited amount of time. That pleasure comes, it's enjoyed, but it doesn't equate to continuous unbroken happiness. Now, this realization doesn't mean that we will need to push pleasure away. It doesn't mean that pleasure is a bad thing. It just means that if we really register that pleasure, I have received pleasure in my life, but it doesn't deliver continuous unbroken happiness. So the registering of that is the registering for ourselves of what one of the concepts is pointing at. One of the concepts here says your happiness is not to be found in pleasure or pain. If we register this for ourselves, it means that our relationship to pleasure or pain can start to change. So what is happiness for the human being? It's not happiness through outcomes. We find out that it's happiness is the end of suffering, the absence of human unhappiness. And so we can either say that happiness is the end of suffering, or we find that the end of suffering equates to something very simple: peace of mind. Suffering is actually being not at peace with life as it is in each moment. So happiness for this human being turns out to be the absence of suffering, which really means being at peace with life as it unfolds moment after moment after moment. So there's a reason why I'm going step by step here, and that reason is that we become very clear, not just in this discussion today, but hopefully something we can take with us and will stay with us for our whole life, or at least it's relevant for us to stay with us for as long as we find ourselves seeking. What am I really looking for? And if we have an answer that is simple and clear to understand intellectually at first, and then once we understand it intellectually, we can confirm it time and time again based on our own experience. Then each time we find ourselves feeling lost, it may very well help to say, actually, what am I looking for, and am I still on track? And so with the clear answer, I'm looking for happiness for myself in this life, and happiness is the end of suffering. Simply peace of mind, regardless of the circumstance I find myself in. Whenever suffering arises, we'll find that our objective in that moment is not peace of mind. Our objective has become something else. And it's having a different objective that is creating the suffering. Attachment to outcome is one such objective that gets prioritized. And when that becomes a priority, suffering is bound to arise often. It will arise often because the priority for outcomes being pleasure, 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 that priority means that life is going to unfold as it unfolds, something that we're not in control of, delivering pleasure sometimes, but at other times pain. And if we've got this attachment to outcome, meaning an insistence that I want pleasure, 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 then the relationship that we have to life is going to be one of resistance. We're effectively going to be saying to life, I want pleasure, 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 and look what you're doing. You're delivering me pleasure sometimes and pain at other times. And that relationship to life creates an uncomfortableness, which is our unhappiness. And so if we feel this unhappiness, we can ask ourselves, what am I really looking for in life? And the answer comes to us, I'm looking for happiness, which is peace of mind, regardless of circumstance. And in this moment, what is happening in my head is a insistence on life looking a certain way, life looking the way it looks, and there's a conflict. And there's this uncomfortableness. The conflict is an uncomfortableness. And then we find, this uncomfortableness is because I have forgotten what I'm really looking for. So the Buddha made it quite clear, enlightenment is the end of suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. So what he means in that context, desire means an attachment to outcomes, an insistence that my happiness, my completeness is to be found in pleasure. And once we have this ingrained belief that my happiness is to be found in pleasure, that my completeness is to be found in pleasure, then that belief becomes our attachment to pleasure. That attachment to pleasure is desire, meaning we're going to be craving after pleasure. And that effectively means, desire means my priority, what I think I'm looking for is pleasure. So we're looking for happiness, which is the end of suffering. Let's look at the different forms of suffering. Actually, this is the only relevant discussion. We find that suffering is guilt, blame and pride on the one half, anxiety and worry and attachment to outcomes on the other side. Guilt, blame and pride are all based on a belief that I am the doer and the other is the doer. What this means, that I am the doer, the other is the doer, is a way of seeing life in such a way that life is seen whereby whatever happens through me, this body, is my doing. I was in control of it. I chose of my own free will what to do, and I was somewhat in control of the outcome. And when we see ourselves this way, then we have to see the other as the same as me, a separate independent entity with total free will to do whatever they feel like doing, essentially meaning that they can choose based on their own volition what it is they do in each moment. And so with this view of myself and the other, if the other delivers pain to me, and I believe that my happiness is to be found in pleasure, 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 the other delivers pain to me, I have to judge them as being the cause of my unhappiness. And essentially I'll say, you hurt me, I hate you. And so that relationship to the other when they deliver pain to us is blame. One of the main forms of human suffering, based on the belief that I am the doer and you are the doer. If you take away this belief, if the belief happens to be false, then blame can't arise. So I use the example sometimes, we send a message to someone asking if they'd like to go out for dinner. We see that they've read the message. It's Facebook, it's seen. So we go, great, they've got the message, and now they're going to reply to me. And 15 minutes go past, and no reply to your simple question, would you like to go out for dinner tonight? Half an hour goes past, and now there's this internal noise going on. What's going on? I just asked a simple question. Why haven't you replied to my question? 1 hour later, still no response. 2 hours later, no response. What's going on? Don't you know I have a life to live here? The other person is delivering pain in the moment to you because it's not matching your preference. And then we judge them as being appropriate or inappropriate, right or wrong, based on how they are, which means we're blaming the other for being different to the way we want them to be, on the basis that we believe that they're in control of the way they're being, that they're the ones that are choosing to be that way. And furthermore, on the belief that them being the way I want them is my happiness, that them delivering the pleasure that I want is what will make me complete. Guilt is the same principle but applied to those actions that happen through me and that deliver pain to the other or pain to myself. And so guilt is looking at that action and saying, this is my action, my doing. I'm in complete control of everything I do and I should have done it better. I could have done it differently. And then feeling self-judgment or self-blame, which is guilt, still based on the belief in personal doership. And pride, based on personal doership, but looking at those actions that happen through us that deliver positive outcomes. And then the feeling is, look what I have achieved. My doing. I was in complete control and I succeeded and created this wonderful outcome. Now, guilt and blame feel much more intense and much more uncomfortable than pride. However, they're based on the same principle, and so pride is still based on the false idea of who we are. The false idea that we are the doer, in complete control of everything that happens through us. Now, the purpose of breaking this down is because what we're talking about here is human suffering. Guilt, blame, and pride. And what the concept suggests is what we're really looking for in life, whether we know it or not, is simply human happiness. And human happiness is the end of suffering. So if we're looking for the end of suffering, the question is, well, how can suffering end? The good news is that suffering can end because suffering is based on a mistake. That's the only reason that continuous unbroken happiness for the human being is available. Because the thing that disturbs continuous unbroken happiness or continuous unbroken peace of mind for the human is suffering. And suffering arises based on a false idea, a mistake, an error. And if the error is corrected, then it makes sense that the secondary error that comes from the primary error falls away. Problem solved. The error is this deeply ingrained belief that life has put in place, because what we come to see is that we're not the doers. That what happens in life is a happening and not my doing. And so the ingrained error, the belief that I am the doer, also is not my doing. But if we see that it's there, then we can't deny that it's not there. It's there, but it's not my doing, so how did it get there? And the suggestion is that life, the story of life, does everything, makes everything happen. That this experience that we're having in each moment is the experience of life, the experience of a creation that has been created to be exactly the way it is, unfolding moment after moment after moment, exactly the way it's destined to unfold. The human being in each moment and how they act is based on their biological makeup. And biologically, the human being is based on two factors. If we can find a third factor, then this theory starts to have holes in it. But no matter how much we look, we won't find a third factor. So in each moment, the human being is based on two factors, their genes and up-to-date conditioning. And when we investigate this, we find that I wasn't in control of my genes, and I wasn't in control of the family I was born into, the society that I was born into, the school I went to, the temple or church that I went to, the friends that I made. And all of those factors contribute to my up-to-date conditioning. So we can see that life actually is a series of new conditioning. In each moment, life provides new conditioning, and that new conditioning updates our existing conditioning. It either adds to our existing conditioning, or it radically changes our existing conditioning. But at each point of time, we can say that we have a bundle of up-to-date conditioning that is continually changing by how life impacts us in the next moment. And so these words is just new conditioning. So how life brings about change is by changing the up-to-date conditioning of the human being. The existing beliefs that are in place are a result of the genes and current up-to-date conditioning. So the belief I am the doer has been put in place by life, conditioning us moment after moment after moment exactly the way it has. And the belief will be dissolved following the same principle. Life continuing to condition us, but now delivering new conditioning that has the potential to dissolve the existing beliefs. So in each moment, the human being needs to make decisions. That's life. And if we're looking for happiness in daily living, we also come to realize that daily living equates to interhuman relationship. So we're really looking for happiness in interhuman relationship. And in life, in interhuman relationship, the human being needs to make decisions very regularly in each day. What we find is that we find ourselves in a circumstance, needing to make a decision one way or another, and at some point a decision is made. And this is the same process that man has had to follow in all of time, from the beginning of human existence. People find themselves in a situation and need to make a decision. The decision that gets made, which seems like my decision, my choice, on investigation, is a choice based on the circumstance, based on the options at hand, and the decision is made by the human, which is made up of these two factors, genes and up-to-date conditioning. So if awareness starts to land on the fact that this is how the human being functions, thinking, which we are convinced is my doing, my thinking, I am the thinker, on investigation becomes seen as a impersonal function based on the body's genes and up-to-date conditioning. The body includes the brain, so the brain is part of the body, and the brain is a very intricate biological machine, part of the genetics of the body, and a machine that has been conditioned moment after moment after moment in life. And so at a particular point in time, it produces certain thoughts. The thoughts would be different if the mechanism, if the machine was different. The fact is that the machine is only one way in each moment, the way it is in that moment, and that's based on everything that came before. So circumstance that we usually relate to as if it's very personal, so interhuman relationship, is seen to be the interaction of two independent entities. I feel like I am this entity in complete control of everything I do, including how I think and how I act. And just simply coming to see the human being differently means that some radical changes in our belief system can happen. And those radical changes can lead to a very radical difference in our experience in life. So the ingrained belief, I am the doer, means that we don't realize that in each moment what happens through me is what is destined to happen based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning. If we come to see this, it's like, oh, I'm not the doer, but rather life is happening through me. That what I'm doing, I'm speaking these words because this is my destiny. A destiny that is unfolding because life has put in place the genes and up-to-date conditioning in order to enable this to happen in this moment. So two chemicals have their own unique chemical makeup, and when they come together there is a reaction, or a reaction between the chemicals, and that reaction can be harmonious or it can be explosive. And whether it's harmonious or explosive is not something that the individual chemicals decide. What happens is a very impersonal reaction based on the chemical makeup of each of the chemicals, and the reaction is something that is destined to be exactly the way it is. And the chemical, this is an analogy or a metaphor for human existence. Humans are like very complex organisms, but the fact that we're very complex, it's the same principle, that this complexity will interact with the momentary, with life in a particular moment, and a certain output will happen. An output that when it happens, usually we say, oh, that was a great result, well done. Or, that was a terrible result, I hate myself. Or that was a terrible result, I hate you. So we can keep coming to satsang, actually. But this is the crux of it. I think sometimes it's not really registered that it can be this simple. What I mean by simple is, I understand that life, it's all destiny. So we can hear something 1,000 times and hear it a certain way. And then maybe on the 1,001st time, it clicks, something clicks radically. And that's exactly as it's destined to be. But my insistence sometimes is to really listen to the concepts, which are really simple concepts. And really see what they're pointing at. So in this last half an hour, effectively the only thing that's being said is we're looking for happiness, which is the end of suffering, and suffering is based on the belief, I am the doer, the other is the doer. That belief is a false belief, an error, and so the suffering is an error. If the false belief is seen, it falls away, and the suffering falls away. And then there was some extrapolation into starting to show why the human being is not the doer, because the human being is biological and mechanical, at least in the aspect of the actions and the thoughts and the emotions and the feelings. Starting to show that whatever happens in each moment, the thinking, the feeling, the action, is not something that we control, but something that spontaneously happens as a result of a combination of the human as they are in that moment and life as it is. And so the suggestion is that in daily life, awareness needs to keep landing on this error as it happens, the error which manifests as an uncomfortableness in the moment, based on life being painful sometimes. And when awareness lands on this uncomfortableness, the question might spontaneously arise based on our genes and up-to-date conditioning. The question is, why is this error happening? What is in play for this suffering to arise? And then awareness can look at the circumstance that's happening and realize, my friend said that they were going to pick me up half an hour ago, and here I am standing on the side of the road. Where are they? Pain in the moment. Someone said they were going to do something and they didn't deliver. That is part of the flow of life, perfectly understandable if we understand that life is going to be pleasure sometimes and pain at others. We become aware of the fact that we are judging the other as being the source of my pain. Now, sure, it is through them that the pain is delivered. They haven't picked us up as they said they would. But was that their doing, or did life conspire for circumstance to turn out this way? If we have blinkers on and we see that they are this independent entity that is completely in control of how their day unfolds and what they remember and whether they pick us up on time or not, whether there's traffic on the roads, whether their car breaks down. Sometimes we just forget, which means a thought that says, oh, I have to pick my friend up, just doesn't arise. It's actually, forgetting is not something that we do. Forgetting is the absence of remembering. We don't actively, I have to remember to forget. So as awareness lands on this and is interested in what's going on, it can start to see what's happening. Friend didn't pick me up, that's pain in the moment. That pain is being treated as an attack on who I am, and blame towards the other is being placed. And then the thought might arise, actually, life is unfolding exactly as it's destined to unfold. That the other is not in control of what they do. That even the suffering that is arising is not my doing, something that is happening and must be part of destiny. And that series of thinking can cut off the suffering, can cut off the thinking, the obsessive thinking of blame and attachment to outcomes, meaning attachment to life looking a certain way in that moment. So to ingrain this understanding, Ramesh used to suggest a little activity, practice, which he would also advocate as not being really a practice, but rather something that can just happen based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And the new conditioning that becomes part of your up-to-date conditioning is me describing the practice, for example. And then you might find the practice happening. And the practice is this: pick one event that happened during the day that you are convinced was your doing. Other things that happened in the day you're not so sure of. But this one thing during the day you are sure was your doing. So let's say that you put out a fire that you noticed in the waste paper basket. And if you investigate that event, you'll find that you were sitting on the couch, and then suddenly the sense of smell picked up a burning smell. So before we go into that, in theory, we'll find that we're not the doer of what we believe is my doing, because on investigation we'll find that we, in a particular moment, saw something, heard something, smelt something, touched something, or tasted something. That we weren't in control of seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, or hearing. And that seeing happened based on the body's. And as a result of seeing, smelling, tasting, a reaction happened in the body based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning. It might have inspired a thought. A thought of, after seeing a bird, might have been, wow, that's a nice bird, or that's a big bird, or that's a dangerous looking bird. Now that thought was inspired by what we saw, which we weren't in control of. The thought was based on one's genes and up-to-date conditioning, which we've come to see is not my doing, but something that has been put in place by life. And from that point, we might get up to close the window, because we think it's a dangerous looking bird, and I'll close the window. And that movement is a follow-on from the thought that that's a dangerous looking bird. And the movement to close the window is also based on our genes and up-to-date conditioning. And as we're closing the window, the bird flies in the other window that we haven't closed yet. So we find that the outcome, not in my control. So in the case of this event that we're certain was my doing, I put out the fire in the rubbish bin. And we investigated, and we see that we were sitting quietly, watching television, and then we smelt something that we weren't in control of smelling. It just, the smoke came in the room and smelling happened. Then a reaction inside the brain happened and said, that's the smell of smoke. There shouldn't be smoke here. So that inspired the standing up to go and see where the smoke was coming from. And then something was seen that we weren't in control of. The fire in the rubbish bin was seen. And then another thought said, fire in the rubbish bin is not good, water puts out fire. So the body runs to the sink and fills up a container with water, runs back to the fire and tips the water on the fire. If it's a paper fire, we find that the fire goes out. If it's an oil fire, we find that we tip water on it and the fire gets bigger. So the outcome of our actions not in our control. Sometimes we get what we want and sometimes we don't get what we want. And if we investigate these actions that we're convinced are our actions and find each time that what happened is a series of reactions, a series of cause and effects that started off by something that we weren't in control of, and that the sequence of events that happened were a sequence of events that were mechanical, that also I wasn't in control of. And they start off somewhere and then end with an outcome that is not in my control when we investigate it. And so as we tick off each time, wow, not my doing. I thought this was my doing, but I investigated, I find not my doing. And then day after day we investigate something and on the same principle, not my doing, not my doing. And after a month of investigating something and finding each time that it's a result of factors outside of our control, seeing something, smelling something, tasting, touching something that we weren't in control of, reacting to that, a thought arising based on the body's genes and up-to-date conditioning, the body acting following that thought, also based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning, that at the end of a month we'll be absolutely convinced that all of these things that I initially thought were my doing, we're absolutely convinced that not my doing. And so then someone can come in and say to us, hey, what do you think about this notion that we're not the doers? Sounds a little crazy to me. The person said, well, it's not as crazy as you might think. I've just spent a month investigating these actions that happened that I was convinced were my actions. And each time I find not my doing. So this person now, after the personal investigation, has become an advocate for themselves, that I'm not the doer. And the other person goes, well, I'm not so sure. And we can understand why they're saying, I'm not so sure. But if they were to investigate this time and time again for a month, they'd probably find themselves shifting position to the same standpoint. And so when life then unfolds, where someone does something that delivers pain to us, the old reaction would be, you did this, I hate you. The new reaction is, this is a happening, not anyone's doing. It's not a conceptual thing that we have to just pretend that I'm not the doer. This becomes a deeply ingrained seeing of how life unfolds for oneself. That seeing dissolves the beliefs that say I am the doer, and then life continues to unfold and it simply doesn't generate the same response. So I'm sure that someone has some comments or questions to make. Could you pass them?
So actually, destiny is really not based on genes and up-to-date conditioning. That is just something that's put there for us to feel that there is a logic explanation to cause and effect, right? I mean, that cause and effect is a logic explanation for whatever destiny has in store.
So there's the two sides of the one coin. And that is that on the one side, we can start to see life as a spontaneous creation that was designed to be exactly the way that it is. Meaning that life is a creation of source, that source at rest before it has manifested, so source in its unmanifest state explodes into manifestation. And that explosion is the story of life. That is all put into place prior to time. So time and space is not an objective reality, but rather part of the story of life, the creation that has come into existence. And so from that perspective, everything that happens in each moment has already happened. And in fact, what we think is A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, can just as easily be seen D leads to C, leads to B, leads to A. That it's all that each moment is actually independent of the one before and after it. However, from within the creation, we can see that the creation is a creation that has been designed to look like a story of time and space, to look like a story of evolution, to look like a story of cause and effect, or not even to look like, it is a story of cause and effect, it is a story of evolution, it is a story of time and space. And so when life is observed, it will always seem to unfold based on cause and effect. It will seem to unfold that A led to B, led to C, led to D. And so how the story, the predetermined story of life unfolds is through each individual doing in each moment what they are destined to do. And upon investigation, we'll find that what the individual does is based on their genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so we could say that it's apparently based on the genes and up-to-date conditioning, because actually it's all a predetermined story of life. That the story of life is, as Ramesh used to say, in the can. It has been written, acted, directed and produced, and it's in the can. However, when it's unfolding, it will always follow rules of cause and effect and the cosmic laws, the laws of physics and that have been put in place. But the laws of physics in themselves are not realities, but contained within the creation itself. So up to this point in time, the story of life hasn't decided to unfold outside of the known laws of physics, so we don't see apples floating past us. In theory, there's no reason why an apple couldn't float past us if, in fact, all of life is an experience created to unfold exactly the way it's designed to unfold.
But in case it did, then the laws of cause and effect would suddenly not be working, and for us it would be not understandable that that's happening, right?
From the basis that we are absolutely certain that everything is absolutely happening because of the laws of physics, an apple floating past us in life will not be able to be computed. There won't be we won't be able to reconcile it. The fact that an apple actually is floating past will mean that that humanity will radically have to reassess what they've taken to be truth. But this is all a bit of a hypothetical. There's in practice, that floating apple may never be part of the story of life. So, on the one hand, someone can say, oh, well, in that case, cause and effect is illusory or apparent, is not real. And from one perspective, one side of the coin is that everything is a spontaneous creation that is arising in this moment, and that cause and effect is an illusion. From the other side of the coin, what arises always unfolds according to the laws of cause and effect, which means that in practice I can't live my life saying everything is a spontaneous arising. In practice I will live my life placing my order with the waiter and knowing that my food will only appear after I've placed the order. So that placing of the order when it happens is part of the destined story of life. Happens exactly as it's destined to happen. The outcome has already happened. But I have to wait and see whether I get the food that I ordered. I can place the order for some orange juice, and 2 minutes later the waiter comes back and says, I'm very sorry, we have no oranges, so you can't have your order. All of that, according to this concept, has already happened. And yet we're in the story of life, watching it unfold. And what unfolds is always going to be causal. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. The realization that can happen is actually that's the illusion of life. But once the illusion is recognized, we still end up living life as if it's a story of cause and effect.
What happens if suddenly you can't, like, what happens if this kind of makes a short circuit in the way you perceive things, and at some point you start perceiving things and like the knowledge of it not being real starts causing a disruption in how you make decisions?
So that would still be not your doing.
Yeah.
It would be a happening according to the unfolding destiny of, well, your destiny. And how it would have happened is that life would have introduced certain concepts, certain new conditioning that becomes part of your up-to-date conditioning. And then that up-to-date conditioning will determine how you make decisions. And you might find yourself making decisions based on a very strange set of assumptions, or on a strange basis. But when we look at it, that those strange decisions based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning that life has put in place.
You just mentioned that everything has already happened. But it's yet to happen, right? It's not already happened. If it had already happened, then time travel would have been possible.
Yeah. No, so it's very much like a movie that is in the can. So the end already exists. And what we are experiencing is the unfolding of the storyline. So what we see in each moment is just one frame at a time. And so from the point of view of where we see it, we don't know that it's all happened. We can't see what has happened. That doesn't necessarily mean that it hasn't already happened. So if time travel was possible, it would be possible because it is part of the story, part of what happens at a certain point in the story. Time travel becomes possible. Which, in physics, now there's understanding that time is not as linear as they thought. And so there may be a point in the story where portals, what I think they're calling wormholes or whatever, we find that a wormhole, you enter a wormhole and you end up somewhere else in the universe, but because the universe is not just space, but could be a distortion of time as well, you might find that you enter a portal and end up in a different time period. If that happens, it's all part of the destined story of life, but it will start to demonstrate that our linear view of life is not necessarily as accurate as we might think. But this time travel may never happen, and that doesn't mean that things are as they seem. So the point of the fact of saying everything has already happened is really pointing back to the fact that whatever happens in each moment is the only thing that could have happened. So when a question is asked, my answer is unknown to me until it comes out. And in theory, I could have said any number of things, but in practice, I'll only say one thing. And that one thing, we can say, is based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning. And that everything that came before was similar, was an unfolding, and only one thing happened in each moment, the only thing that could have happened. And so if we look at it from the perspective of the initial impulse in the universe, then everything that happens after it is basically a mechanical ripple of the initial impulse. So if we had the initial explosion of consciousness or the Big Bang, then everything that happens after that is a domino effect. And where it all ends up, we don't know, but it's all determined by the initial impulse. So similarly, if we hit the white ball onto a triangle of balls on a pool table, where all the balls end up has already happened according to the initial impulse. So if we were to enter the data into a computer simulator and say how hard we're going to hit the white ball and at what angle, and press simulate, it will tell us where all the balls will end up. And so when we hit the white ball in exactly the same way, we'll find that the result matches the computer simulator suggestion. And so from that point of view, we can see, wow, before it even happened, a simulator could tell me what was going to happen, which means that as long as the impulse, the initial impulse is one way, the outcome will only be one way. Obviously, if we hit the ball differently to what we put into the simulator, a different outcome will happen. But if we then change the simulation and put the new data in, it would change the picture, and the picture would actually match what happened. So we can see that as long as everything is mechanics in a system, that the initial impulse determines the final outcome. So the question then is, in life, is there a component that isn't mechanical? Is there a component that affects the flow of life that isn't mechanical?
So that white ball example, the initial impulse determines the outcome, then it is cause and effect.
Yes, but then from the point of this creation, we then have to go to what was the ultimate cause of the initial impact, or the initial, what caused the initial. And at some point we go beyond, outside of cause and effect, to something that is not causal. So outside of the manifestation is the uncaused, or the non-causal, where the laws of cause and effect don't make sense anymore. So what that's saying is that the source of the manifestation is source at rest, where no laws of cause and effect exist. That source is absolute nothing, and at some point it explodes into manifestation. And what determines that initial explosion is not something that is causal. That initial movement is simply consciousness at rest becoming consciousness and movement. But if we take if we move forward one step, and then we say that the second initial impulse, which the initial impulse that we know of, is actually the second one. What is after time and space comes into existence, and so from that point on, everything can be said to be causal.
So once the idea of not being the doer is seen completely as illusion, what is the qualitative change of the conditioning and the genetics?
So once the idea that we are the doer is, because I think you said...
Is seen completely as illusion,
Yep.
then what happens to the conditioning and the genetics from that perspective?
Yeah, so it's the genetics, let's assume genetics stay the same. We're now seeing that genetics actually change, but the fact that they change is irrelevant. It's still that in each particular moment there's going to be genes and up-to-date conditioning, however they happen to be in that moment. The belief that I am the doer is part of the up-to-date conditioning. And so in order for the belief I am the doer to fall away, the up-to-date conditioning needs to change radically. At least that part of the up-to-date conditioning. So a change in belief is a change in our up-to-date conditioning. So if the belief I am the doer falls away, the up-to-date conditioning has already changed. So that's the qualitative effect of, it's actually the other way around. It's the up-to-date conditioning changing that is the falling away of the belief that I am the doer. The belief I am the doer is contained in the up-to-date conditioning.
So what remains after that?
We still remain with genes and up-to-date conditioning. The body will always be a conditioned instrument. It's just that a certain aspect of the conditioning has been seen to be false and then falls away. So a large part of conditioning remains there in place, and that conditioning that remains in place is not problematic for human happiness. So the conditioning about how to do mathematic calculations, let's say speaking language, how to use a knife and fork, how to do exercise, most functions in life, all functions in life are based on conditioning. So the process is only a process that dissolves a very particular type of conditioning. The conditioning that says, I am the doer, and that I need pleasure in order to be complete. So effectively, if you have, a circle which is your conditioning, life just erases a portion of that conditioning, being the portion which causes human unhappiness and happens to be conditioning that is inaccurate compared to what life really is. So your question is valid. What happens after? So what there is before this realization or this change, transformation happens, is that there is the ego, which is the human entity, with the belief in personal doership. And after, there is still the ego without the belief in personal doership. So historically, the word ego actually refers to this belief in personal doership. And we're told that we have to kill the ego. And what hears that is the belief in personal doership. It says, oh, I have to go out and kill the ego. And so that then effectively means that the belief in personal doership gets perpetuated because it has a job to do. It has to go out and kill itself. And so this is reframing it and say what we are is the ego, and the ego isn't the problem. The ego is what has to live its life before and after liberation. Liberation is simply the process whereby this additional belief system that I am the doer falls away. So before there is an ego with the sense of with the belief of personal doership, after there is an ego without the belief in personal doership.
In continuation with what you were saying, before and after, and you speak about flip-flop It's very interesting. I just want you to continue or talk about flip-flops and in your own experience about that.
Okay, so the flip-flop is a term used to describe a period of the spiritual seeking process whereby significant insights have happened, and those insights lead to periods of peace, continuous unbroken or continuous peace for a period, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, that peace shifts and suffering comes back. And that suffering may last for a week, let's say, and then it shifts back into peace. And that might last for a week, and then it shifts back out. So we seem to find ourselves in this flip-flopping period. That flip-flopping can be, the duration can be very different. You can have 1 week of peace and 6 months of a period where the peace has gone out the window. And the reason that happens is that the beliefs have become weaker and seen through, but they haven't completely dissolved. And so at some point, life impacts us in a certain way, and the belief that we feel has dissolved completely, we feel it based on the fact that we're living life for a period in peace. Life is still painful from time to time, and yet we're completely surprised. Wow, my relationship to circumstance is completely different to the way it was. And we can get this sense, it's happened. This is it, I understand, I see life. And because of having seen life differently, this peace kicks in. And then unexplainably, it feels like everything, all our understanding has gone out the window, and we feel ourselves dragged back into this contraction, this way of relating to life that is definitely not peaceful. And this flip-flopping keeps happening, and it's the process by which the remaining ingrained beliefs get worn away. They get worn away by awareness landing on what's happening and seeing the dynamic that's still at play, the attachment to outcomes and the belief I am the doer and the other is the doer. And at some point, when the beliefs in doership are completely eradicated by life reconditioning us. So when I say awareness lands on the dynamic, really that awareness is just coming to see the dynamic again, and that becomes part of our up-to-date conditioning. The realization, oh look, there it is again. Blame arising based on the belief in personal doership, and recognizing, let's say, that that's based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning, 2 factors I didn't have control over. All of that becomes ongoing up-to-date conditioning. And at some point, we'll look back and we'll realize, oh, the flip-flopping has stopped and I've been in flip. That's the peace phase for 6 weeks or 6 months. And that's when we might say, oh, so it's happened. And this is very contrary to some of the ideas that we have about it happening. It happening is often seen to be some momentous event where, the angels come down from heaven. And actually it can be so subtle that it takes us 6 months to realize, oh, suffering, that's it, suffering just hasn't been happening. This is also a reason why it's very important to be clear at the beginning, what is it that we're really looking for? Because if we aren't clear on that, then it makes sense that there'll be all these ideas that we're looking for something far more fancy than what actually presents. What actually presents is that we get to live as a very ordinary human being, doing very ordinary human things, going to lunch, going to work, having relationship, doing in each moment what we think or feel we should do, without any special powers, without being in control of the outcome, without being able to magically get everything that we want. Life carries on more or less as it did before. The only difference is that we find that life unfolding more or less as it did before no longer creates a resistance to life. And even that is realized to be not my doing. I'm not actually working extremely hard to not resist. It's just that the makeup of the instrument has changed radically in one respect, that these beliefs, one very specific set of beliefs, have fallen away. And now life isn't triggering those beliefs. The other way of putting it is that the falling away of the belief in personal doership reveals our connection to Source, which means reveals the understanding that what I am essentially is a combination of a body and impersonal consciousness of Source that is linked to the body and is functioning through that body as personal consciousness. And that's what everyone is. Everyone is the same. A unique body or vehicle through which the one impersonal consciousness of Source is functioning. So one Source connected to everyone and functioning through everyone. So that which is looking through the eyes of all of us is actually the consciousness of Source. That is moving all of us to think and feel and act exactly the way in each moment is the one consciousness of Source. Which means, whatever I do, whenever I'm doing anything, thinking, speaking, sitting, talking, eating, that has to be because I'm connected to Source. Actually, not that I am connected to Source, that what I am is an extension of Source. But then that recognition extends to everyone else, that what everyone else is the same. An extension of Source. It's just that for a period of time, the other vehicles that Source is functioning through include this up-to-date conditioning, which is I am the doer. And that I am the doer creates the impression of separation. Creates the impression that, well, what I do is not affected by anything else. I am an independent doer and thinker. And it's very easy. We start, if destiny is to start investigating, we see what I think is completely affected by everything that came before. No one's had a unique thought, an original thought. Thought is completely dependent on a whole lot of factors that have come before. My movement in a particular situation, whether if I find beggars coming up to ask for money, whether I get angry, whether I get afraid, whether I get frustrated, whether I feel compassion, all of those are a biological arising in the moment that is based on my particular genes and up-to-date conditioning. There's no question about being afraid being better than being angry, or compassionate being better than being afraid. They're all equal in principle. They're a biological arising based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning. On another level, obviously, being compassionate and giving the money might be better from the point of view of the person's hunger. And when we see that happening, well, then we can see it's destiny for that person to get some money and maybe buy food, or maybe the money ends up being something they get beaten up for. We don't know. And if we find that we don't give money and the impulse is to keep walking, hopefully, if we see everything as a happening, there won't be this additional load of guilt and blame.
So, in line with all of this, where am I in this? Am I a character in this movie, in the can that's unfolding, that can be clearly perceived? But I'm also beyond this movie and I'm watching it. And then there's a third way to perceive this, is that this movie is mine only. In fact, it's happening only in me. And without me, it doesn't exist. So at various times, each one of these can feel as true.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it?
Yeah. See, so this is very good. There is none of, who knows which one of those is true. We start off having an experience of life as me being a separate doer, that this is an objective reality. That's the experience that we have of life. And then along the way, what can happen, and this doesn't have to be, this is not the only way it happens, but experience can change such that the quality of, or the qualitative feel of the experience is significantly different, whereby the experience seems to be witnessed from the perspective of awareness in which everything arises. And then what can happen is we can say, oh, this is truth, and we can put forward the I am, the consciousness in which everything arises. That's what the experience suggests. That's what the experience demonstrates. The previous experience demonstrated that I was the doer, a separate independent entity. We can make the mistake of now going, oh, that was false and this is real. It's just another experience, an experience of witnessing. And in the experience of witnessing, there is the sense that what I am is, outside of the experience, or on the edge of the experience, that I am that which everything arises in. And ultimately we have to come to say, well, I really don't know what truth is, what I am. All is suggested by the quality of the experience in each moment. What tends to be good enough is the fact that at some point we can come to realize it's all experience. That there isn't such thing as experience and then reality. Those profound awakenings that feel like we have stepped out of experience into reality is just a new experience, designed to feel as pristine as it does, as profound as it does. And if we come to see that it's just experience, then we can come to the conclusion that, each moment is an experience, and I just have to live my life as the character in this experiential world, doing in each moment exactly what I think or feel I should do. And from that perspective, a lot of our beliefs, the capacity to form strong beliefs that I am this or I am that I am the doer or I'm not the doer, that life is destined or it's not destined, all of that falls away. So even the concepts that I was putting forward about cause and effect or spontaneous creation, I don't know that they're the truth. They're concepts that I know from my own personal experience are very useful concepts to bring us to a point where whether life is an experience or whether it's a reality or whether it's anything in between, is sort of irrelevant, because we can find ourselves living happily, which turns out to be all that we're really looking for. So when we find ourselves living happily with no idea of who we are, no idea of what this is, meaning the complete falling away of any beliefs, the beliefs we started with, the beliefs that the seeking put in place, then the thing is, who cares? Really, the belief in the me has fallen away, and we find ourselves living happily. And all of these questions, which this is not to say that they're not valid questions, but to answer the question, we have to say that in the end, the question falls away. And what is left that's undeniable in the experience, ever present in the experience, is a recognition that I am. That's undeniable, that in this moment, I am. But what is very undefined. It has no boundaries, because the belief of what I am as this or that, Roger the body, has fallen away. And what we find is that the experience then changes such that I am, but what is this I am? And we don't need an answer to it, because just the feeling I am is known to be the only answer we'll get. The good news is that being that delivers the happiness, meaning the end of suffering, and all of the questions are usually arising from the uncomfortableness. Yeah. So in the end, we don't get that many answers, but the questions tend to fall away. So don't believe any of these concepts as truth. They're not truth. The only truth in the manifestation is the impersonal sense of I am. And that was a concept.
What happens when you don't do what you really want to do? So imagine you have, I don't know, let's say you have a woman who has a family, but she has a deep desire to run away with a circus, let's say. And this is really what she feels like doing, and she struggles with the decision, and in the end she decides not to run with a circus, but to stay with her family against her will and against her wish, right? And she lives with this frustration, but in the end, she didn't do what she was feeling like doing. And then she comes here and she hears you and she says, well, but if what I feel like doing is what's supposed to determine my destiny, then what happened there? I mean, obviously her destiny was to stay with the family, but she resisted her longing to do a different thing.
Mm-hmm. So there's a subtlety in the concept that you're referring to, and it comes down to a play with words, is that the description of how everyone lives and how life unfolds according to what is destined is that in each moment everyone will do exactly what they think they should do or what they feel to do. So that is the description that describes life as it applies for everyone. In each moment they're either doing what they think they should do or what they feel to do. When it comes to living life happily, from my perspective, looking at the journey that happened, one of the most significant shifts that took place that was part of the dissolving of the false ideas of who I am was the shift from following a long list of shoulds and shouldn'ts that were in place to starting to feel into the body and feel what the body was telling me to do. And so that it would be described as a shift from doing what I think I should do into doing what I feel to do. When I realized that there was another way of living, that these shoulds and shouldn'ts were basically a list of what society has said to do based on society's attachment to pleasure, and a list of shoulds and shouldn'ts that I had put in place as my strategy to get what I thought I needed, which was certain pleasures in life. And really starting to feel the experience showed me that living that way delivered an internal uncomfortableness during the day. And I wanted to know, what is this uncomfortableness? And in practice, I found it was something, in my case, very simple. It was that I would come home from work and I was tired and I wanted to lie on the couch. I really enjoyed lying on the couch when I was tired. But then I'd find that I had an appointment to meet someone. And looking at the time said, well, you've got about 5 minutes before you have to get off the couch. And my shoulds and shouldn'ts said, well, you have to go, you should go because you said you were going to go, so you can't cancel. You can't not turn up. And as the minutes ticked down to the time when I had to get ready to leave, I would start to feel more and more conflict, internal conflict, between what I felt like doing on a biological level and what my shoulds and shouldn'ts were saying that I had to do. And when I realized this, I said, I've got to fix this, because what I'm really looking for in life is actually the absence of this internal conflict. And how the fixing of it came about was at first to realize that I have the option to cancel dinner, even 10 minutes before. I'm not saying that it's going to be the most pleasant of things for the person that I've made arrangements with, but I do have the option. And I couldn't recognize that the option was there when I was following my strong sets of shoulds and shouldn'ts. Because the shoulds and shouldn'ts said, you shouldn't cancel, that's it. You don't have any option, you shouldn't, or you can't cancel. Then I realized, actually I have these options to cancel. And if I want to get rid of this internal uncomfortableness, I need to start going beyond my shoulds and shouldn'ts. And so it started off by me, in a sense, being brave enough to send a message, oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it tonight. And what I found was a response that I didn't expect. And the response was, oh, great, I'm so tired tonight as well. Let's do it another time. So moving down into operating from a place of feeling rather than shoulds and shouldn'ts, what I thought would deliver bad outcomes actually started to deliver good outcomes on many different levels. I also understood that that's not a given. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to understand that I'm cancelling all the time. And some friends might say to me, look, that's just unacceptable and I don't want to be friends with you because you're unreliable. And I can understand that. I didn't need to justify it. I could say, yes, I am unreliable. I cancelled 10 minutes before. And the consequence is that they're no longer my friend. And I would say, well, that's sad, but I've decided that what I'm really looking for is the end of this internal conflict. And so once that became clearly my objective, my priority, then the consequences of doing things differently was accepted. I accept that because now I'm honoring my priority of trying to find a way of living life that doesn't include this internal uncomfortableness. And then it became clear, actually, instead of cancelling, which is not how I want to live my life, stop making arrangements for times in the future when I don't know how I'm going to feel. So that was the next part, is that okay, if someone asks me to do something, I say, well, I'm sorry, I can't say yes because I don't know what I'm going to feel like in a week's time. So that was how the next part of the process unfolded, is that I started being much more spontaneous in what I did, based on what I felt like doing. And so the movement into feeling in each moment what to do was a significant shift that basically highlighted that until that point in time, until realizing that there is a place in the body that tells us in each moment what we really feel like doing, until knowing that was there, I was just simply following a whole lot of rules. And the rules were there because they seemed like the rules that would get me what I thought I needed. And in the end, it boils down to love from the other. Either material pleasure that ultimately will lead to love from the other, because I'll be able to buy things for people, or they'll see how successful I am. And so those were all different forms of love from the other. And at some point we realized, no, my happiness isn't to be found in love from the other. My happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. And it's questioning all of those shoulds and shouldn'ts and really dropping them, which is the deep changing of that belief, that my happiness is to be found in love from the other, or my happiness is to be found in outcomes. If we intellectually say, oh, my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes, and yet we still keep all of these shoulds and shouldn'ts in place, it means that we haven't really understood at depth that my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. So then then that process went through many different phases until such time as it became then very easy to start to interact very normally again and say yes to invitations that were even 2 months in advance, just by feeling. And the feeling is, yes, I want to say yes to this. And once decisions were made from there, what I found is that the 2 months would pass and it would be the day of the event, and I'd find, surprisingly, I feel like doing this. So there's a magic in this process that kicks in. And so now the second definition is living life happily, in my experience, is about in each moment doing exactly what I feel like doing. So the first explanation is an explanation that covers how life unfolds. In each moment, everyone is doing what they think they should do or what they feel to do, one or the other. And happy life, for me, is to, in each moment, do exactly what I feel like doing. Knowing that what I feel like doing is based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning, that really means that what I feel like doing is actually God's will, not my will. But what I feel like doing feels like my will, so I see that my will, which is actually God's will, and not two. And in doing what I feel like doing, I know that the outcome is never in my control, sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. And I have to accept what the outcome is, not in my control. Sometimes I get what I want and sometimes I don't.
Yeah, but in the case of complicated life decisions, that might not be as easy to determine, like, what is it that you want to do, and second, to drop the shoulds and shouldn'ts. Like, for example, in the case of a woman who might abandon a family to do what she really feels like doing, I don't think it's like it would happen so easily that she'd just be like, oh, you know, like I dropped all my shoulds and shouldn'ts, so fuck my family and I'll just go with the circus. Mm-hmm. And in the case she makes the other decision, then she's not really doing what she wants to do. So in certain type of decisions, it gets more complicated. Like the bigger the responsibility is within the decision, then the more complicated it gets too.
Sure, which is why sometimes people find themselves frustrated in life because they can't justify making certain changes because of their life circumstance. And so that's also life. Life is a story of deep frustration. If we use the benchmark of what am I really looking for in life, the end of suffering, and we become aware of our suffering and become aware of what is leading to that suffering, then that to me is where the really important changes can come from. if we become very clear that my suffering is stemming from this way of dealing with life, then, and if that really becomes our priority, then we'll make whatever changes we can to bring about a reduction or an end in that suffering. And we might find that we can't make the changes. We might find that our love of our family, if our family is what is in the way, it's actually never our family, it's always our attitude to the flow of life. But if we find that we can't change even our attitude to the flow of life, because we feel that a change of attitude is going to affect those we love, and that the love for those is so strong, or the attachment to those people is so strong that we can't change, then that's destiny. But what is important to point out here is that our happiness is never to be found in the flow of life, never to be found in circumstance. It's always to be found in our attitude to circumstance. So if someone finds themselves in a family situation, it's not the family situation that is the cause of their unhappiness, but rather their attitude to the family situation. And so if someone has the belief that it is my family situation that is causing the problem, then they'll have the belief that I have to change my situation. And then they might come into a conflict. I have to change my situation, but I can't change my situation because I love my family too much. So at this point it's worth saying, well, it's actually not the family situation, that's circumstantial, and that's either pleasure or pain. The fact that someone wants to go off to the circus and they can't is pain in their life. They're not getting their preferences. And so if their attitude to that changes, there'll be a freedom from this attachment to living in a circus. That in this moment, what we feel like doing has to be limited to what's available to us. So I don't have the thought in each moment that, so if I say I'm going to live in each moment according to what I feel like, that's accurate. But I don't have feelings that I want to fly. The feeling that I want to fly isn't part of what I feel like in each moment, because I know that flying is not available to me as a human being. I don't have wings, I can't fly. So those options get eliminated, those that are not options for me. And those that are options, then I will choose which one I feel like. So maybe the person has to look at it and eliminate the circus as being an option.
But if the pleasure of going to the circus is more than the pleasure of being with the family, then we would go to the circus anyways.
Yeah. So what it comes down to a matter of fear as well. So the fear of losing the family might be stronger than the pleasure of going to the circus. And so if the pleasure of going to the circus becomes stronger than the fear of losing the family, then the movement will be to the circus.
So I guess it's about refining that possibility of understanding what it is we want, right? Like it's not really sometimes what superficially feels we want. It goes at one level down, right? And it's really tapping into what it is according to circumstances that we want.
Sure. I mean, we might have a job and we might say, I don't want to go to work. But you know that if you don't go to work, you won't have any money come in, you won't be able to pay the mortgage, you won't have a house for your family. So on the one hand, we say, I don't want to go to work. But when you look at what it means and what it means not to go to work, then really you come up with the conclusion, actually I do want to go to work because I'm choosing to go to work because it gives me this paycheck because of what it delivers. Is that what you mean by dropping down to see? Yeah. then the problem is if we have this strong idea that having a certain house for our family to grow up in, that belief could be a belief that my happiness and my family's happiness is to be found in outcomes and circumstance. So if someone has the belief that they need a very expensive house and therefore they want to go to work, which is 60, 70 hours a week in order to support, and then that's creating an uncomfortableness on another level, then an assessment of really, am I being driven because of a strong attachment to outcomes that says my happiness and my family's happiness is dependent on having this very expensive house? And if that's in place, then what we'll do is we'll feel obsessed and convinced that we want to work when actually it's coming from a false set of beliefs. So it's all a very intricate thing that we have to explore and add a lot of awareness onto. And when we go back to the core principle, it's suggesting that our unhappiness is based on our attitude to life, our attitude to circumstance, and the attitude to circumstance that is problematic is that my happiness is to be found in pleasure, and that I am the doer and the other is the doer. So guilt, blame and pride based on I'm the doer, the other is the doer. Worry and anxiety and expectation and attachment to outcomes based on the idea that my happiness is to be found in pleasure. Now it's up to us to start investigating how our life is being lived, whether it's being lived based on these beliefs, and when awareness starts landing on this, then the subtle changes start happening. So, it's about that time again today. Thank you.